Hey everyone, so today we're going to be taking a look into how to write a metal guitar solo, specifically how I approach writing a guitar solo, and we're going to take a look into my solo from The Hunter that I wrote for Symphony of Heaven to give you a little direct insight into how I, applied my own method for writing a solo to this song. So real quick, let's go ahead and take a listen to it, and then we'll jump right in. Okay, so that's the solo we're going to be breaking down today, and I'm going to start by walking through my general kind of overview of how I approach writing a solo from start to finish. Then we'll apply it directly to The Hunter. So, might sound kind of redundant, but the first thing you want to do when you're writing a guitar solo is listen to the track you're playing over, really get very familiar with that backing for the solo. So again, might sound kind of redundant, but if you just jump straight in, trying to write it without really knowing the form super well, without knowing the changes well, it just makes it a lot tougher. So really make sure you're familiar with that, and then that'll bring us into the first real step of writing the solo. And for me, that's going to be just coming up with a picture in my head of what I want the solo to be like. So whether that's going to be something more melodic, if it's going to be something with more excitement to it, just figuring out what's going to fit that section the best, fit that song the best. So here, a lot of people will start humming over it, maybe singing something over it, kind of trying to come up with some ideas, before even picking up the guitar to play along. I'm not big on the humming or singing, maybe every once in a while, but it's not my go-to, but I know that works for a lot of other people. But whatever works best for you, just try and get a general idea in your head of kind of what you want to go for with the solo. And then once you have that in mind, then go ahead, pick up the guitar. I like to just loop the solo section and kind of improvise over it. Some people like to just improvise on the recording, just continually improvise until they're okay, I'm happy with that take. I prefer to have a fully written out solo, but I still like to start by improvising over it. That way I can come up with some ideas that I might not have if I just jumped straight into, composing the solo. I do like to improvise over it at least a few times first, see if I come up with anything cool that I want to stick with, and then once you do come up with some of those parts, you can kind of start to build off of them, continue improvising, but, stick with playing that one part wherever it was in the solo and kind of build from there. And then once you feel like you have, a few ideas that you want to, run with, then that takes me to where I actually would start, composing the solo. If there are any faster, more technical parts to the solo that I know hey, in this section, I really want to build up here, add some excitement, play something that's, just going to be a little bit more complicated. That's where I really sit down and start writing those parts out. And then from there, you kind of finish crafting the solo. You have the parts that you came up with in the improv section, you've built off of those, you've written out any other parts, whether connecting those or just parts you wanted to build up more. So that's where the full writing process comes in. Then I like to finish by recording a scratch version of that. Doesn't have to be perfect at this stage, but just kind of getting it down so that way you can kind of come back to it a few days later and listen over it again, decide if there is anything you want to change. I have done that before where, I've skipped that step. I've just, recorded it as soon as I finished writing it, and then listening back to it a few days later or a week later, whatever it is, then, decide that there were some things I wasn't fully happy with, wish I would have, let it sit for a few days, come back with a little bit different of a perspective on it. And then from there, you can kind of refine things if you feel like there's anything you want to change. If you still are happy with it, then great, just go ahead, clean up any parts you need to and record it again. But I find a lot of times there are going to be little things you might want to tweak, whether it's just, the phrasing of how you played something, whether it's an entire part that you're like, yeah, that just doesn't fit as well as I would have liked. So that last kind of revision step, to me is really important, really helpful, just to get things exactly the way you want them. So now we're going to jump into how I, did that for the Hunter. So wrote this back in May or June, somewhere in there. So going to do my best to remember exactly where my mindset was at. But I knew with this one, starting from that visualization step, I knew I wanted it to start out a bit more melodic, but then really build up in intensity. It's a fairly fast song, around 180 BPM. So in my opinion, when the song's driving like that, having a solo that stays a little bit more laid back the whole time just doesn't really fit. You kind of need to keep up with that excitement. But I still like to have solos that do capture your attention right from the beginning, but start off a little bit more melodic, and that gives you room to build up. If you start off, going 100%, just straight after things, that doesn't really give you any room to build later on. So I'm a really big fan of like Marty Friedman. To me, was one of the best at doing that. John Petrucci on a lot of his solos is good at that. A lot of different players out there you could name that really, build solos up. So that's kind of the way I generally like to approach it. There's a time and a place for, starting off full throttle, but with this one, that's not how I wanted to go. So I had that kind of picture in my mind. And again, I listened to the track, figured out kind of what the chord changes were. This one was a little bit interesting because it wasn't full chords that we were playing over, or even power chords. It was just single notes, kind of following this gallop rhythm. So kind of to give you just a little taste of that, started off on E minor. Well, start off on E, I should say. Something along those lines. So, kind of gives you some freedom here. It's a little bit different than playing over full chords. When you're just playing over single notes like that, you can kind of play whatever you want over that single note. You can play kind of in different keys. Brandon Ellis from the Black Dahlia Murder is someone who I know does that quite a bit. He really likes to mix up different sounds when he can, fit them over the progression. So, if that's your thing, go for that. I still like to kind of approach things from a key center. So here it's pretty much in the key of E minor, starts off on E, goes up to G, back to E, down to D. I'm not going to go too much into the theory stuff today, but again, just to give you the approach of kind of what I'm thinking through there. So I'm still approaching this over E minor. It comes off of the D. You could look at that as D7 going into the E minor. So I'll play through that first section, kind of show you my approach to that. So that first section, again, is coming off of the root note D, leading into the E. So I'm starting off with kind of an inversion of D7. I'm thinking about it more in the diminished, like F sharp diminished sense, where you're taking that D7 arpeggio, but you're leaving the root note out, you're leaving the D out, so you're just ending up with... And so when you expand on that, you get that full, F sharp minor, not F sharp minor, F sharp diminished, which you can look at any of the inversions of. Let me try that again. There we go. So those diminished chords kind of recycle. You can look at them in different ways. But anyway, so using that kind of to grab the listener's attention right from the start. And then that leads you right into the E minor. So going from that F sharp up to G, which is the third over E minor, down to the root. And one thing I was trying to do throughout this whole first section and a little bit into the second is I like using arpeggios to form melodies. Again, being a big Marty Friedman fan, he did that a lot. So again, outlining the start of this melody with that F sharp diminished, going into the E minor, and then that continues up, hitting the B the fifth, the E the root, then going down to the like major seventh there, kind of giving it a harmonic minor sound, and then going up through the series of arpeggios here, the E minor 7, then where it switches to D, we're hitting again an inversion of like a D7, kind of more like a D9. I still am throwing that E in there. But anyway, using those arpeggios to still form the outline of a melody is something I really like to do. Not something you always have to do, but if you're looking for a way to, kind of give you some direction with writing a melody, start just kind of playing around with the arpeggios, maybe adding a note here or there that's, not within the arpeggio, or kind of skipping over some notes, just playing around with it to make it a little bit more interesting, find the melody that's going to fit there. And so that's kind of my approach to starting that, playing around those arpeggios, really trying to keep it a little bit more laid back at first, but still have it interesting enough that it kind of captures the listener's attention. And then the second section, kind of continuing that pattern, but then starting to build. So the next 4 measures, we're coming off of that F sharp here. So that was rough, but you get the idea. So anyway, the thought behind that section, still continuing, following the changes there. At this point, it's sitting on the D, so it's kind of just staying stagnant on that one chord. So playing again, just D major, D dominant 7, a little bit of both in there. And then, the first 2 measures or so, still, keeping it a little bit more melodic, but then going into the sweeping there in the later 2 measures to start building up the energy into this next section of the solo. Again, my whole perspective here is I want to, start out a little bit more melodically, build the solo up, and then finish on a really strong point, especially since this is, a faster song again, kind of needs that extra energy going into the solo. So once we hit that next section, which is then going to be over the B root note, I'm looking at it as B dominant 7, so the 5 chord in E harmonic minor. Again, playing around a little bit with like the more of a B7 flat 9 or C diminished kind of idea here. So hit that B root note, bend up. And there at the end of that, I switched from, the sweeping we've been doing into an alternate picked run, which is just E harmonic minor there, but it's landing on C here, which is the next note the chord progression goes to. So the reason I went for that instead of continuing that like diminished sweeping idea I was doing, I find that, as fast as the sweeping can be, it, to me, just sweeping up and down, can add some excitement, but it doesn't drive the same way that an alternate picking line does. So the end of that section, throwing in that alternate picking line, and then from there, that's going to lead us into the last section, which is, again, kind of all alternate picking, kind of thinking about like, an Alexi Laiho, Children of Bodom, style vibe to it. Just really aggressive alternate pick section, because again, to me, that helps drive the energy even further. It's still the same speed as the sweeps were. I mean, all 16th notes here, but again, just having that alternate picking, in my opinion, sounds a little bit more driving. It adds even more energy to it than what the sweeping does. So jumping into that last section. And so what I'm going for in that section, instead of having a full, like 4 measures of alternate picking, I kind of land on notes for a second and then go into another run, land on a note for a second. And all those notes I was landing on were chord tones for the changes there. The ending part of the solo, the riff, after it hits the C, then goes back up to D, back to C, and then back up, working its way to E. So something along those lines. So anyway, trying to again follow the chord changes. Anytime I was landing on a note, I wanted it to fit over the chord progression going there, the harmony going there, and then that bend at the end. So something I really like to do, just a stylistic preference. But you'll see a lot of guys end a solo bending up to a chord tone. So that would be like where it goes from D back to the root of E minor, bending from the D up to the E. Which, I mean, sounds good on its own. It's not a bad thing to do, but I really have grown fond of bending up to a chord tone and then releasing down to whatever note I want to end on. So here I'm bending up to the F sharp, that's going to work over that D right before this, and then releasing down to the E where it hits the E minor. So again, just a little personal preference there. But again, so that's kind of the general approach I take to writing. I start by listening to the track. I visualize what I want it to sound like. So in this case, I wanted it to start melodic, really build up towards the end, kind of end on a really kind of nasty bend there. And then from there, I just jammed over it a few times, trying to come up with stuff that I liked. That little lead-in part in the beginning was one of the things I just kind of came up with improvising, and then some of the other bits in there, knew that I wanted to throw that like diminished sweep section in there, and then past that just sat down and started to write out some of those other parts, connect things together. And then this was definitely one that, I sat on for, a week or so, came back and made some changes on. So, it was something that I came back and revised to make sure I, had exactly how I wanted it to be. So yeah, that's my general approach to songwriting, or writing a solo, I should say. This isn't the only way to do it. It's just my approach specifically. And I know when I was starting out on guitar, it was pretty difficult to figure out how to write a solo, in my opinion. It was something I struggled with. Learning solos was one thing, but, once I actually wanted to start writing, I found I just didn't really know where to start. So I thought I'd give you guys some insight into that. If any of you find yourselves in that position, hopefully this helps you. And if you do want to see more, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Like the video, definitely helps. And then if you want some more direct help, I do teach private lessons. You can go to jakejensenguitar.com to find out more about lessons, and the tab for this also should be up on my website by the time this video is out. So yeah, hope you enjoyed it. Hope you all have a good one.